The millionaire boss proposes a marriage of convenience to his maid, but true love changes everything. The Manhattan corporate world was abuzz that Monday morning. The buzz in the corridors of Bennett Enterprises wasn't about the fluctuations of the financial market or a new billion-dollar merger. It was about Christopher Bennett, the 35-year-old CEO, and the scandal that threatened to destroy not only his reputation, but the entire empire built by 3 generations of his family. Christopher watched the city through the windows of his 45th floor office, his fingers drumming nervously on the mahogany desk. A headline from the Wall Street Journal flashed on his tablet: Bennett heir under investigation. Arranged marriage to Chinese socialite raises suspicions of immigration fraud. Mr. Bennett, Miss Santos is here, his secretary announced over the intercom. Amelia Santos entered the office carrying a pile of documents. At 28, she had transformed her position as housekeeper at the Bennett mansion into something much more significant. She was practically a household manager and personal assistant, coordinating all of Christopher's private life. "Amelia, close the door, please," Christopher ordered, his tense voice revealing the seriousness of the situation. "We need to talk." She obeyed, unconsciously smoothing her navy blue blazer over her simple dress. Her brown hair was tied up in a professional bun, and her honey-colored eyes showed concern. "The lawyers have just left," Christopher began, running a hand through his dark hair. "The situation is worse than we imagined. If we can't prove that my relationship with Lin Wei was legitimate, the company could face a federal investigation." Amelia nodded, already aware of the situation from the rumors circulating around the mansion. Christopher's failed engagement to the Chinese heiress had turned into a public relations nightmare. "There is a solution," he continued, his blue eyes fixed on Amelia. "But I need your help." "Of course, Mr. Bennett. How can I help?" Christopher took a deep breath. "I need to get married. Immediately. With someone above suspicion. Someone who can prove a long-standing relationship." The silence that followed was deafening. Amelia felt her heart race as the realization hit her. "You've been working for my family for 5 years," Christopher continued. "You know every aspect of my life. It would be convincing." "Are you asking me to marry you?" Amelia asked, her voice just a whisper. "I'm proposing an arrangement," he clarified, getting up and walking over to her. "A temporary marriage for as long as it takes to resolve this situation. In return, I'll guarantee a comfortable life for you and your family. Your younger sister will be able to attend that medical university she's always dreamed of, and your mother will receive the medical treatment she needs." Amelia felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. As the eldest daughter of Brazilian immigrants, she had always carried the responsibility of helping her family. Her housekeeper's salary, although generous, barely covered her mother's basic expenses and medical costs. "How long?" she asked, her mind already calculating the implications. "A year at most. Enough time for the lawyers to sort everything out." Christopher leaned closer. "You'll have a contract guaranteeing your rights and compensation. Then we could divorce discreetly." Christopher's cell phone vibrated. It was his lawyer again. The pressure of time was palpable. "I need your answer today, Amelia," he said softly. "I know it's a lot to process, but I accept," she replied, surprising them both with the speed of her decision. Christopher blinked, momentarily disconcerted. "Are you sure? Your family gave me a chance when I needed it most," Amelia explained, straightening her shoulders. "Besides, I know how important Bennett Enterprises is to its employees. I can't let everything fall apart because of a scandal." The relief on Christopher's face was visible. He picked up the phone, typing quickly. "I'll get the lawyers to prepare the documents. We can get married this week." Amelia nodded, trying to keep her composure as her world turned upside down. A marriage of convenience with her boss was not in her life plans, but there she was, about to become Mrs. Bennett. "One last thing," Christopher added, his tone serious. "For this to work, we need to look like a real couple. We'll have to live together, appear at social events, build up a convincing story." "I see," Amelia replied, although her stomach churned at the thought. "I'll do what's necessary." When she left the office a few minutes later, her hands were shaking slightly. In her handbag, an old photo of her family smiled at her. Her sick mother, her 18-year-old sister dreaming of medical school, her father who had left too soon. For them, she would do anything. What Amelia didn't know as the elevator descended to the first floor was that her decision would trigger a series of events that would change not only her life, but also Christopher's, in ways that neither of them could have predicted. The business deal they had just made was about to turn into something much more complex, especially when the heart decided not to follow the contractual clauses. The next 3 days passed like a whirlwind in Amelia's life. After accepting Christopher's proposal, she found herself plunged into a race against time to turn a farce into something that looked genuine in the eyes of the world. "Your new suite is ready, ma'am," informed Margaret, the senior housekeeper who would now be her subordinate. The gray-haired lady's gaze carried a mixture of curiosity and suspicion that made Amelia swallow. The move to the main wing of the Bennett mansion on the Upper East Side was the first of many changes. Her old room in the staff quarters now seemed a lifetime away, even though it was only 2 floors apart. "Christopher insists that you attend the meeting with the lawyers this afternoon," said Patricia Morrison, the firm's public relations officer, who had practically moved into the mansion to manage the situation. "We need to line up all the details of your story." Amelia nodded, nervously adjusting the new engagement ring on her finger, a Tiffany ring that had cost more than her 5-year salary. Christopher had insisted on buying something convincing, as he put it. In the mansion's library, the meeting with the legal team was unfolding like a script-writing session. Patricia paced back and forth, gesturing as she spoke. "You've gradually grown closer over the last 2 years," she recited. "The romance began discreetly in order to maintain professionalism in the workplace. The engagement was kept secret due to the bad publicity of the previous affair with Lin Wei." Christopher, sitting by the fireplace, watched Amelia with interest. She maintained a composed posture, absorbing every detail of the fabricated story, occasionally making precise notes on her tablet. "Amelia," he called softly, interrupting Patricia, "are you comfortable with all this?" The question took her by surprise. Since the agreement, Christopher had been strangely attentive, concerned about her well-being in a way that went beyond the need to keep up appearances. "I am," she replied, holding his gaze. "But I have a condition I'd like to add to the agreement." The room fell silent. The lawyers exchanged tense glances. "I want the contract to include a clause guaranteeing the employment of all the mansion's current staff for at least 5 years after our divorce," she declared, her voice firm. "Those people depend on those jobs as much as I did." A small smile appeared at the corner of Christopher's lips. "Done," he replied without hesitation. That evening, Amelia called her mother, Helena, who still lived in the small apartment in Queens where Amelia grew up. The conversation in Portuguese flowed naturally, but each word weighed like lead. "Mom, I'm getting married," she said, sitting on the edge of her new king-size bed. The silence on the other end of the line was broken by an exclamation of surprise. "But daughter, you've never mentioned a boyfriend." "It's Mr. Bennett," Amelia replied, her heart clenching at the half-truth. "We've grown closer over the last few years." Her mother's outburst of joy made her eyes fill with tears. Helena had always dreamed of seeing her daughters fulfilled, and in her mind, Amelia was living a real fairy tale. A soft knock on the door interrupted the call. Christopher entered, carrying a folder of documents. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, noticing her watery eyes, "but we need to go over some details of the prenup." Amelia said goodbye to her mother and discreetly wiped away her tears. Christopher sat down next to her on the bed, keeping a respectful distance. "I know this is hard," he commented, his voice softer than usual, "but I want you to know that I'm grateful, very grateful." She nodded, taking the documents he offered. Their hands touched briefly, and Amelia felt an unexpected shiver run down her spine. "The wedding will be the day after tomorrow," Christopher continued. "Just a civil ceremony with a few guests. Patricia suggested a larger reception in a few weeks' time when the dust has settled." "What about your family?" Amelia asked, suddenly worried. "Your parents?" "They're in Europe," he interrupted her. "I've already talked to them. They're not exactly happy, but they understand the need." The silence that followed was filled with the distant sound of Manhattan traffic. To the room's French windows, the city lights created an almost romantic setting. "Amelia," Christopher called out, his voice serious. "I know I promised it would only be for a year, but we need to be prepared. The investigation may extend. It may be necessary. I'll keep my word for as long as it takes, she interrupted him, her determination clear. As long as you keep yours. He nodded and stood up. At the door, he paused for a moment. Dinner at 8? We need to start looking like a couple at some point. Amelia agreed with a small smile. When the door closed, she turned her attention to the documents on her lap, but her mind wandered. In less than 48 hours, she would be Mrs. Bennet. The thought made her dizzy. In the hallway, Christopher leaned against the wall for a moment, loosening his tie. The guilt of involving Amelia in this situation consumed him. But there was something else, something he wasn't prepared to admit. The way she defended the employees, her quiet strength, her dignity in the face of it all. She was so much more than he had ever realized. The clock on the wall ticked away relentlessly, taking them into a future that neither of them could foresee. The civil ceremony took place on a rainy Thursday at the registry office in Manhattan. Amelia wore a simple white Carolina Herrera dress, Patricia's choice, which insisted on maintaining a certain glamour even in a low-key ceremony. Christopher, in his impeccable Italian suit, looked more tense than usual. "The rings, please," asked the judge, his monotone voice echoing in the small room. Amelia's hands trembled slightly as Christopher slid the white gold ring onto her finger. The cold metal contrasted with the warmth of her fingers, and for a fleeting moment, their gazes met. There was something different about the deep blue of his eyes, a mixture of gratitude and something else she couldn't decipher. Patricia Morrison, who was serving as a witness along with James Hartford, the lead attorney for Bennett Enterprises, was discreetly recording every moment on her tablet. "Perfect," she murmured as the couple exchanged a chaste kiss to seal the union. Exactly the kind of restrained intimacy we were hoping for. The impromptu reception took place on the rooftop of the Plaza Hotel, where a small selection of company executives and close friends gathered for an elegant lunch. Helena Santos, Amelia's mother, wept silently in her corner, still dazzled by what she considered to be her daughter's fairy tale. "My daughter, Bennett," she whispered in Portuguese, hugging Amelia. "Your father would be so proud." Those words were like daggers in Amelia's heart. The lie weighed more heavily when she saw her mother's genuine happiness. Christopher, sensing her discomfort, approached discreetly. "Is everything all right?" he asked softly, his hand resting gently on her back. "Yes, Amelia took a deep breath. "It's harder than I thought." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of greetings, glasses of champagne, and rehearsed smiles. When the last guest left, Amelia found herself alone with Christopher in the hotel's presidential suite, where they would spend their first night as a couple. Yet another suggestion from Patricia to keep up appearances. "You can have the bedroom," Christopher offered, picking up a pillow. "I'll sleep on the sofa in the living room." "Don't be silly," Amelia protested, her practical side emerging. "The bed is huge, and we need to get used to sharing spaces. What if someone from the hotel staff sees us?" Christopher hesitated for a moment before agreeing. They prepared for bed in uncomfortable silence, each in their own nightly ritual. Amelia emerged from the bathroom wearing a set of silk pajamas, another unsolicited gift from Patricia. "Amelia," Christopher called out as she lay down on the other side of the king-size bed. "I want you to know that," he paused, choosing his words, "I appreciate not only what you're doing for the company, but the way you're conducting all of this." She turned to face him in the dimness of the room. "It's the least I can do, considering how much your family has done for me." "Even so," he insisted, "you could have refused. You could have asked for much more in the settlement." "Some things are more important than money, Christopher," she replied softly. The silence that followed was filled with the distant sound of New York traffic. Christopher watched Amelia's profile against the city light coming in through the windows. In 5 years of working together, it was the first time he had really seen her, not as his efficient housekeeper, but as a woman of extraordinary strength and principle. The next morning, the front page of the New York Times Social carried a discreet photo of the couple leaving the registry office. "Bennett Enterprises seal marries an intimate ceremony," the headline read. Patricia had done an excellent job of controlling the narrative. Breakfast was served in the room, and while they shared toast and coffee, they began to discuss the next steps. The Bennett mansion would be their new joint home. and there would be a series of social events in the coming months where they would need to appear as a couple. The Bennett Foundation charity ball is in 2 weeks, Christopher commented, consulting his phone. It'll be our first official appearance as a couple. Amelia nodded, trying to ignore the nervousness that consumed her. It was one thing to manage events as a housekeeper, but quite another to attend as Mrs. Bennett. Patricia has arranged some sessions with an etiquette consultant, Christopher continued, hesitantly. Not that you need it, but I understand. Amelia interrupted him with a small smile. I need to learn how to navigate this new world. Breakfast was interrupted by a call from James Hartford. The investigation into the Linway case had been temporarily suspended, but the lawyer warned that they would need to keep up appearances for at least 6 months. When they returned to the mansion that afternoon, the reality of their new life began to set in. Amelia's belongings had been moved into the master suite, her toiletries lined up next to Christopher's in the huge marble bathroom. Welcome to your new home, Mrs. Bennett, Margaret said with an enigmatic smile as she greeted them at the door. Amelia swallowed, feeling the weight of her new title. Beside her, Christopher subtly intertwined his fingers with hers, a gesture that was becoming surprisingly natural. What neither of them realized yet was that, while they were carefully constructing this facade of marriage, something real and unexpected was beginning to blossom between them, something that no contract or agreement could predict or control. The first month as Mrs. Bennett tested all of Amelia's limits. Etiquette lessons with Madame Beaumont, a strict Frenchwoman appointed by Patricia, turned her afternoons into an endless parade of social rules, correct pronunciation of French wines, and the subtle art of navigating conversations at high society dinners. One more time, dear, insisted Madame Beaumont, adjusting Amelia's posture. A Bennett doesn't bow, she bows gracefully. The Bennett Foundation charity ball was approaching, and with it, the first major test of their sham marriage. At the mansion, Christopher and Amelia rehearsed their fabricated love story every night, memorizing details that needed to seem natural. Our first kiss was during last Christmas, Christopher would recite, walking through the office. You were hanging the last star on the tree, I helped you down the ladder and the timing was perfect, Amelia added, her voice betraying a touch of irony that made Christopher smile. The forced cohabitation was creating an unexpected intimacy between them. They shared breakfast in comfortable silence, discovering each other's little habits. Christopher always read the financial news first. Amelia preferred her first cup of coffee without sugar. One evening, while they were going over correspondence in the office, Amelia felt a sudden wave of nausea. The aroma of dinner wafting up from the kitchen, normally pleasant, seemed unbearably strong. Are you all right? Christopher asked, noticing her pale face. Just a little unwell, she replied, taking a deep breath. It must be the stress of preparing for the ball. Christopher approached, genuinely concerned. Maybe we should call a doctor? That's not necessary, Amelia insisted, but another wave of nausea made her stagger. Christopher took her by the shoulders and guided her to the sofa. Enough work for today, he decided, his voice brooking no argument. I'll ask Margaret to prepare some ginger tea. That gesture of genuine concern caught Amelia off guard. It was in these small moments that the line between reality and role-playing began to blur dangerously. The day of the ball arrived with all the pomp expected of a Bennett event. The Plaza Hotel was transformed into a winter garden, with white orchids and crystals hanging from the ceiling of the ballroom. Amelia emerged from the dressing room, wearing an emerald green Valentino dress that made her honey-colored eyes glow like amber. Christopher, adjusting his bow tie, stopped momentarily at the sight of her. You look, he hesitated, searching for the right words. Gorgeous. The blush that tinged Amelia's cheeks needed no rehearsal. Thank you, she replied softly, reaching up to adjust his tie with the familiarity of a royal wife. At the ball, all eyes were on the new Bennett couple. Amelia navigated the groups of socialites and executives with a grace that surprised even Patricia. Madame Beaumont's lessons had been worth every torturous moment. Tell us how Christopher finally realized what a treasure he had right under his nose, asked a high society lady, her curiosity barely disguised behind her social smile. Christopher, who hadn't left Amelia's side for a second, wrapped his arms around her waist, good-naturedly. Actually, it was during a snowstorm, he began, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart leap. The mansion's generator had failed, and I found Amelia organizing a distribution of blankets and hot chocolate for all the staff. That's when I realized I could no longer deny what I felt. The story was rehearsed, but there was something about the way Christopher told it that rang true. Amelia found herself wishing it were real. Later, during a slow dance, Christopher held her close, their bodies moving in perfect sync. "You're doing incredibly well," he whispered in her ear. "I had a good teacher," she replied, allowing herself to relax in his arms. It was then that another wave of nausea hit her, stronger than the previous ones. Amelia paled visibly, her hands tightening on Christopher's shoulders. "I need air," she whispered urgently. Christopher led her discreetly out onto the terrace, away from prying eyes. In the cold night air, Amelia breathed deeply, trying to control the feeling of unease. "This isn't normal," Christopher declared, his concern evident. "We'll make an appointment tomorrow." Amelia nodded weakly, a suspicion beginning to form in her mind. Her cycles had always been regular, but with all the stress of the last few weeks. "Christopher," she began, her voice trembling slightly, I think we need to consider a possibility." He stared at her, confused for a moment, until understanding dawned in his eyes. The night of their honeymoon at the plaza, when they shared more than just a bed, the silence between them was filled by the distant sound of the orchestra and the gentle rustle of the wind. The carefully constructed mask of their marriage of convenience was beginning to crack, revealing complications that no contract could have foreseen. The waiting room of the private clinic on Park Avenue was silent that Monday morning. Amelia watched her hands intertwined in her lap, her wedding ring gleaming in the soft light. Christopher, sitting next to her, kept his eyes fixed on his phone, but hadn't actually read any emails in the last 20 minutes. "Mrs. Bennett?" called the nurse, breaking the tense silence. The blood test had confirmed what they both already suspected. Amelia was 6 weeks pregnant. Dr. Sarah Reynolds, a renowned obstetrician, explained the details of the first trimester while Christopher and Amelia tried to process the news. "Nausea is completely normal at this stage," the doctor explained, but her voice seemed distant to Amelia. Her mind wandered back to that night at the plaza, when the champagne and the vulnerability of the moment had led them to cross a line that shouldn't have been crossed. "I'm going to prescribe some vitamins," continued Dr. Reynolds, "and I'd like to schedule an ultrasound for next week." On the way back to the mansion, the silence inside the Mercedes was deafening. Christopher drove with exaggerated concentration, his fingers gripping the steering wheel with unnecessary force. "This changes everything," he finally said when they stopped at a red light on Fifth Avenue. "I know," Amelia replied softly, her hand unconsciously resting on her still flat belly. "The contract," Christopher began but stopped abruptly. How could they talk about contracts and agreements when an innocent life was involved? When they arrived home, Margaret welcomed them with her usual efficiency, but there was something in her gaze that suggested she already suspected the situation. Amelia's morning nausea had not gone unnoticed by the experienced housekeeper. "We need to talk," Christopher said as soon as they entered his private office. "About how we're going to deal with this." Amelia sat down on the leather sofa, feeling strangely calm despite the circumstances. "We can't keep this a secret for long." "No," he agreed, pouring himself a whiskey before sitting down next to her. "Patricia will suggest that we bring forward the announcement of the pregnancy. We'll say we've been trying for a while." The practicality with which he approached the situation made something inside Amelia contract painfully. This wasn't just another corporate problem to be managed. It was her child, theirs. "And then what?" she asked, her voice betraying a vulnerability she rarely showed. "When the term of our agreement is up?" Christopher placed his glass on the table with more force than necessary. "You don't really think I'd abandon my son, do you?" "It's not that," Amelia replied, standing up to create some physical distance between them. "But that baby deserves more than a business arrangement between its parents." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words and unacknowledged feelings. Christopher watched her, noticing how the late afternoon light created a golden halo in her loose hair, how her hands trembled slightly as she hugged herself. Perhaps, he began hesitantly, we could rethink the terms of our agreement. Before they could continue the conversation, Patricia burst into the office, her tablet already in hand. The rumors have already started, she announced without preamble. 3 social columnists called me asking about a possible pregnancy. Amelia and Christopher exchanged surprised glances. How had the news leaked out so quickly? The clinic is discreet, Patricia continued, but someone must have recognized you. We need to anticipate that. The next few hours were a whirlwind of strategic planning. Patricia orchestrated a series of exclusive interviews, photo sessions, and official statements. The Bennett empire needed this story of love and family more than ever. Late at night, when they were finally alone again, Amelia found Christopher on the balcony of the master suite, gazing out at the city lights. "Are you all right?" he asked, noticing her presence. "Just tired," she replied, leaning against the doorframe, and a bit overwhelmed by it all. Christopher approached, hesitantly. "I know this isn't how you imagine having your first child." "No," she admitted with a sad little smile. "But life rarely follows our plans, does it?" He reached out and gently touched her face. The gesture was different from his public displays of affection, more intimate, more genuine. "I promise I'll make everything right for you and the baby." Amelia closed her eyes, allowing herself, for a moment, to believe that there was more to that touch than just obligation. When she opened them again, she found Christopher leaning closer, his intense blue eyes fixed on her. There was nothing staged about the kiss that followed. It was soft, hesitant at first, then deeper, charged with all the emotions they had both been repressing. When they broke apart, panting, the reality of their situation seemed even more complex. "That complicates things even more, doesn't it?" Amelia whispered. "Maybe," Christopher replied, his forehead resting against hers. "Or maybe it simplifies everything." That night, while New York slept, 2 hearts beat in sync, and a third, small and precious, grew silently, oblivious to the complexities of the adult world that awaited it. The news of Amelia Bennett's pregnancy exploded on social media, just as Patricia had predicted. The New York Post ran a photo of the couple leaving the clinic on Park Avenue with the headline, "Millionaire on the way. The fairy tale continues." Christopher watched Amelia sleeping next to him in the king-size bed they now shared without embarrassment. The kiss on the balcony had changed something fundamental between them, creating an intimacy that went beyond the necessary staging. His fingers lightly brushed the still, imperceptible curve of her belly, and a protective feeling invaded him. "You're watching me sleep again," Amelia murmured, slowly opening her eyes. "Sorry," he smiled, withdrawing his head. "It's just that you've been mumbling in Portuguese in your sleep." She blushed slightly. "My mother has been calling me 3 times a day since I found out I was pregnant. I think I'm dreaming about our conversations." Christopher's phone vibrated. It was James Hartford. The investigation into Lin Wei had officially closed after the pregnancy was confirmed, but new challenges loomed on the horizon. "The shareholders are demanding an extraordinary meeting," Christopher informed him, his voice tense. "They want assurances about the stability of the company with the arrival of the baby." Amelia sat up in bed, adjusting her silk robe. "Are they afraid you'll become less business-minded?" "Not exactly," he hesitated. "They want to discuss the succession. A Bennett heir changes the whole dynamic of the board. The reality of the empire her unplanned son would inherit weighed heavily on Amelia." She stood up, walking over to the window that offered a panoramic view of Central Park. "Sometimes I wonder if we're being fair to this child," she confessed, building his life on a foundation of half-truths. Christopher reached for her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "Not everything is a lie, Amelia." Before she could process the meaning of those words, Margaret knocked on the door, announcing that breakfast was served and that the decorator had arrived to discuss the baby's room. The morning passed in a whirlwind of decisions about colors, furniture, and fabrics. The decorator, an elegant woman called Victoria Wells, presented options that would make any decorating magazine sigh. "The Gucci crib has just arrived in the collection," Victoria commented, showing photos on her iPad. "It would be perfect for the Bennett heir." Amelia exchanged an amused glance with Christopher. The ostentatiousness of the world they lived in still occasionally surprised her. "Actually," Christopher interjected, "we were thinking of something more personal." He hesitated for a moment. "My family's cradle has been used by 5 generations of Bennets." Victoria looked slightly disappointed, but Amelia felt her heart race. The thought of her son using something so significant to the Bennet family made everything more real and more frightening. After the meeting, while they were having lunch in the mansion's winter garden, Christopher noticed that Amelia was unusually quiet. $1 for your thoughts," he offered, pouring her more lemon water, the only thing that helped with her nausea. "I was thinking about my father," she admitted. "He loved making wooden furniture. He used to say that each piece had a story to tell." Christopher watched her for a moment. "What do you think about incorporating something he made into the baby's room?" Amelia's eyes filled with tears. "My mother still keeps his last creation, a rocking chair that he never finished before he passed away." "Then let's finish it," Christopher decided. "I can hire the best craftsman to complete the work exactly as he would have done." The emotion on Amelia's face caught him off guard. Without thinking, he leaned over and kissed her softly, his fingers entwined in her hair. "Mrs. Bennet," Margaret hissed from the doorway, interrupting the moment. "The first prenatal yoga class is scheduled for this afternoon." The couple's routine adapted to the needs of the pregnancy. Christopher reorganized his meetings so that he could accompany Amelia to her doctor's appointments, and the mansion gradually transformed to welcome its newest resident. One evening, while they were going over documents in the office, a habit they had kept up since before they were married, Amelia felt suddenly dizzy. "You need more rest," Christopher insisted, guiding her to the sofa. "I'm fine," she protested weakly. "I just need to finish reviewing these contracts." "The contracts can wait," he interrupted her, taking a seat next to her. "But there's something we need to discuss." Amelia stared at him, noticing the seriousness in his tone. "The agreement we made," he began, choosing his words carefully. "Circumstances have changed significantly." "Christopher, let me finish," he asked softly. "This baby deserves to grow up in a stable home, with parents who," he hesitated, searching for the right words, "with parents who are willing to build something real." The silence that followed was filled with the soft sound of the fireplace and the rapid beating of their hearts. Amelia sensed that they were on the verge of something profound and irreversible. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked, her voice just a whisper. "I'm proposing that we stop pretending," Christopher replied, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "That we give ourselves a real chance, for ourselves and for our son." The words hung between them, full of promise and possibility. The business deal that had brought them together was turning into something neither of them had foreseen or planned. Christopher's proposal to give themselves a real chance echoed in Amelia's mind as she prepared for another day of social engagements. The reflection in the mirror showed a different woman from the governess who had accepted a marriage agreement months ago. Now her eyes carried a different glow, and a small curve was beginning to form in her belly. "The Vanderbilts have confirmed their attendance at tonight's dinner," Margaret informed her, entering the closet with a series of dresses. "Patricia suggests the navy blue Carolina Herrera. She says it suits the new sophisticated mother-to-be image." Amelia nodded distractedly, her mind still on Christopher's words from the night before. They hadn't finished that conversation. They were interrupted by an urgent call from Hong Kong that kept Christopher busy late into the night. "Mrs. Bennet?" Margaret called out, noticing his distraction. "Are you feeling all right?" "Yes, just," Amelia hesitated. "Margaret, you've been working for the Bennets for how long?" 28 years, the housekeeper replied, organizing accessories. "I watched Christopher grow up." "Actually, what was he like? Before he took over the company, I mean?" Margaret paused for a moment, a small nostalgic smile on her lips. "Different? Lighter perhaps. The pressure of the company changed a lot of him, but in the last few months," she looked meaningfully at Amelia. "Well, let's just say that the old Christopher is coming back." Dinner that evening brought together the cream of New York society at the Bennet Mansion. Catherine Vanderbilt, a 60-year-old socialite known for her sharp tongue, watched Amelia with calculated interest. "So, dear," she began, her tone falsely sweet, "what's it like to go from maid to lady of the house? It must be interesting." Christopher, who was chatting nearby with some executives, picked up on the comment, and immediately moved closer, his hand finding Amelia's waist protectively. "Actually, Catherine," Amelia replied with a serene smile. "The transition was natural. After all, I've always been part of this house. I'll just change the way I contribute to it." The elegant response surprised the socialite, and the look of pride that Christopher threw at Amelia was nothing staged. Later, after the last guest had left, they met in the library. The usual haunt. Christopher loosened his tie, watching as Amelia kicked off her heels and settled onto the leather sofa. "You were amazing today," he commented, taking a seat next to her. Catherine Vanderbilt is rarely at a loss for words. "I've learned from the best," she smiled, referring to the endless etiquette lessons. "Besides, it's easier to deal with social snakes when you have something real to defend." The last sentence hung between them, loaded with meaning. Christopher moved closer, his fingers finding hers. "About last night," he began, but was interrupted by a sudden expression of surprise on Amelia's face. "Oh," she exclaimed, bringing her hand to her stomach. I think I felt something." Christopher froze for a moment before resting his hand on hers. "The baby. It's too early for kicks," she explained, "but it was like butterflies. Dr. Reynolds said it would start happening around this time." The moment was so intimate, so real, that it made both their hearts race. Christopher leaned in, his lips meeting Amelia's in a soft kiss that gradually deepened. "I don't want to pretend anymore," he whispered against her lips. "I can no longer separate what's real from what's acting." Amelia pulled away slightly, her eyes meeting his. "What if it doesn't work out? If we find out that it was all just," she hesitated, "circumstantial?" "What if it does work out?" he retorted, his hand still on her stomach. "What if we discover that fate sometimes uses unconventional methods to bring the right people together?" The sound of footsteps in the corridor made them separate instinctively, a reflection of the months of staging. James Hartford entered the library, his tense face indicating trouble. "Sorry about the hour," he began, "but we have a situation. Linway is back in New York." The name of Christopher's ex-fiancée dropped like a bomb in the intimate atmosphere they had created. Amelia felt her stomach turn, and it wasn't because she was pregnant. "What does she want?" Christopher asked, his voice taking on the cold CO tone that Amelia hadn't heard in weeks. "Apparently," James continued, consulting his phone, "she's contesting the legitimacy of your marriage. She claims to have proof that it was all a sham to avoid the original scandal." Amelia felt her world spin. Everything they had built, not just the facade, but the real feelings that had blossomed, was under threat. "She's got nothing," Christopher declared firmly, but Amelia noticed the tension in his jaw. "Maybe not," James agreed, "but she has resources and connections. And above all, she has resentment." When James left, the silence in the library was deafening. Christopher poured himself a drink, his mind clearly processing strategies. "Let's face this together," he finally said, turning to Amelia. "Not as a front couple, but as real partners." Amelia nodded slowly, her hand unconsciously protective over her belly. The baby moved again, as if sensing the tension of the moment. "Christopher," she called softly, "I think we need to have that talk now. About us, about the future, about everything." He placed his glass on the table and knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Yes, we do. Because now it's not just about the two of us. It's about our family." The word family made something flutter in Amelia's chest. Of all the lies and truths they had shared, this was perhaps the most important reality to build. The Harrington and Myers law firm occupied 3 entire floors of a skyscraper in downtown Manhattan. Christopher and Amelia were waiting in the main meeting room, where James Hartford was presenting his strategy against Linway's allegations. She claims to have emails exchanged between Bennett Enterprises employees discussing the terms of the marriage settlement, James explained, spreading out documents on the mahogany table. "But none of it is conclusive." Christopher squeezed Amelia's hand under the table, a gesture that had become natural in recent weeks. "What about the recording she mentions?" "Bluff," replied James, adjusting his glasses. "Our IT team checked all the company's systems. There's nothing compromising." Amelia remained silent, her mind wandering to the irony of the situation. What had started out as a front agreement had turned into something genuine, but now they needed to prove the authenticity of feelings that in fact didn't exist at the beginning. "There's one more thing," James continued hesitantly. "Linway has requested a private meeting with Amelia." The silence that followed was heavy. Christopher immediately tensed up. "Absolutely not." "Actually," Amelia interjected, surprising both men. "I think we should consider it." "Amelia, no," Christopher protested, turning to face her. "She's trying to manipulate the situation." "Exactly," Amelia replied, her voice calm but firm. "And maybe it's time to show her that I'm not just a piece in her game." James watched the interaction with professional interest. The dynamic between the couple had changed significantly since their last strategy meeting just 2 weeks ago. "If we decide to go down this road," he mused, "we need to establish clear conditions. Neutral location, close witnesses, the Metropolitan Museum garden," Amelia suggested. "Public enough to be safe, private enough for a real conversation." Christopher watched her with a mixture of concern and admiration. The shy woman he had known as his housekeeper was turning into a force to be reckoned with. The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon. Amelia chose a dark green dress that highlighted her pregnancy in an elegant but discreet way. When she went downstairs, she found Christopher waiting in the hall. "You don't have to do this," he said softly, adjusting the shawl over her shoulders. "Yes, I do," she replied, touching his face gently. "For the three of us." The Met Garden was relatively quiet that fall afternoon. Linway was already waiting, an elegant figure in a white Chanel suit. Her dark eyes scanned Amelia from top to bottom, pausing for a moment on her belly. "Miss Bennet," she greeted, her Chinese accent almost imperceptible after years of American education. "Or should I say Miss Santos?" "Amelia is enough," he replied calmly, taking a seat on the stone bench. "You wanted to see me?" Linway smiled, a gesture that didn't reach her eyes. "You know, when I heard about the wedding, I found it fascinating. Christopher has always been so predictable in his choices. A Brazilian housekeeper? Definitely not his style." "People change," Amelia replied simply. "Not Christopher Bennet," Lynn retorted. "He's the product of generations of calculated planning. Every move, every decision, all to protect the Bennet empire." "What would your marriage to him have been like?" The question caught Linway off guard. For a moment, her mask of sophistication wavered. "Our arrangement was mutually beneficial," she admitted. "My family has connections that the Bennets needed in Asia." "In love?" Amelia pressed gently. Linway laughed, a melodious but empty sound. "Love is for fairy tales, dear. In our world, there are only agreements and alliances." "Maybe that's why it didn't work out," Amelia observed, unconsciously stroking her belly as the baby moved. "Because you both believed in it?" A flash of something hurt? Regret? Flashed through Linway's eyes. "And you don't believe it?" "I did," Amelia admitted. "But then I discovered that sometimes the best deals are the ones the heart makes without consulting reason." The silence that followed was filled with the distant sound of Manhattan traffic and the rustling of autumn leaves. Linway was studying Amelia with a different intensity now. "You really love him?" she ascertained. Not a question, but a revelation. "Yes," Amelia replied, the truth of the word hitting her full force. "And more importantly, I've learned to love the person he really is, not the position he holds." Linway stood up abruptly, adjusting her Hermes bag. "I'm dropping the charges," she announced. "Not because I believe your love story, but because," she hesitated, "because maybe you're right about some things." When Amelia returned to the mansion, she found Christopher in his study, clearly tense from the wait. Before he could ask her anything, she approached him and kissed him deeply. "She's going to drop the charges," Amelia said as they parted. "How?" Christopher began, but she interrupted him with a smile. "Because sometimes the most convincing truth is the one we didn't even know existed until we had to defend it." That night, lying in their bed, Christopher traced soft patterns on Amelia's belly as she told him about her conversation with Linway. "When you said you loved me," he began hesitantly. "It was true," she added simply. "Maybe it always was, even when I thought it was just gratitude or duty." Christopher pulled her closer, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that carried promises of a future that no contract could predict or limit. The news of Lin Wei's charges being dropped provoked a wave of speculation in Manhattan social circles. The Wall Street Journal published a short note on the subject, but the real buzz was in the corridors of Bennett Enterprises, where employees were watching the subtle changes in their CEO with growing interest. Christopher, known for his always formal and distant posture, was now seen smiling during meetings when he received messages on a cell phone. His lighter mood did not go unnoticed by the board of directors, who attributed the change to the stability of his marriage and the expectation of an heir. "The third quarter figures are impressive," commented Richard Holbrook, the longest-serving member of the board, after a particularly successful presentation. "The market responds well to happy CEOs, Christopher." At the Bennett mansion, Amelia was facing her own challenges. The decoration of the baby's room was almost complete, with her father's rocking chair taking pride of place near the window. A Brazilian craftsman, recommended by her mother, had completed the work masterfully, maintaining the original style of the piece. "Your mother called earlier," Margaret said over breakfast. "She wants to know if you've chosen the baby's name yet." Amelia exchanged a meaningful glance with Christopher over her cup of ginger tea. The choice of name was a subject they had been avoiding, perhaps because it would make everything even more real. "Actually," Christopher began, putting his tablet aside, "I've been thinking about it. How about William? It was my grandfather's name, the founder of the company. William Santos Bennett." Amelia tried out the words. "It's strong. But what if it's a girl?" "Sophia," he replied without hesitation. "Like your grandmother." The choice took her by surprise. She had only mentioned her grandmother once, telling how she had raised 5 children on her own in Brazil before managing to bring them to the United States. "You remembered," she whispered, moved. "I remember everything you tell me," Christopher replied, reaching for a hand on the table. The intimacy of the moment was interrupted by Patricia, who entered the dining room carrying a pile of magazines. "You have to see this," she announced, spreading the publications out on the table. "All the major social magazines want to do stories on Bennett's fairy tale da." Amelia looked at the covers, where photos of her and Christopher, taken at various social events, featured romantic headlines. It was surreal to see her private life turned into public entertainment. "We don't have to do this," Christopher said, noticing her discomfort. "We can keep our privacy." "Actually," Amelia replied after a moment's thought, "maybe we should, but in our own way." Amelia's idea was simple but impactful. A single exclusive interview for Vanity Fair, focusing not only on their relationship, but also on the philanthropic work she had been quietly doing through the Bennett Foundation. "We want to tell our story," she explained to Patricia, "but we also want to use this platform for something bigger." Christopher watched her with obvious pride. The woman who had come into his life as a housekeeper now demonstrated a natural understanding of the complexities of the corporate and social world in which they lived. The photo shoot for the magazine took place at the mansion, with renowned photographer Marcus Reynolds capturing intimate moments of the couple. In one of the most striking photos, Christopher was kneeling next to the rocking chair, his hand on Amelia's belly, both laughing at something only they knew. "This is the cover photo," Marcus declared, showing the image on the monitor. "There's something tremendously authentic here." During the interview that followed, conducted by veteran journalist Claire Anderson, Amelia surprised everyone by talking openly about her humble origins in her journey. "Many people see our story as a fairy tale," she said, her hand entwined with Christopher's. "But the real magic isn't in the story. But the real magic isn't in the happy ending. It's in the journey of self-discovery we took together." "What about the initial rumors?" Claire asked, referring to Lin Wei's accusations. "About the marriage being arranged?" Christopher tensed slightly, but Amelia smiled serenely. "Sometimes the best love stories begin in the most unexpected ways. The important thing is not how it began, but what we chose to build together." That evening, after everyone had left, Christopher found Amelia in the library, rereading the draft of the interview. "You were brilliant today," he said, taking a seat next to her. "You managed to turn our story into something inspiring without compromising the truth." "Because it is the truth," she replied, resting her hand on her belly where the baby was moving. "Maybe not the way it started, but it's true now." Christopher pulled her closer, his nose gently brushing the curve of her neck. "You know what else is true? But I'm completely in love with you." The words, spoken for the first time without any pretext or need to keep up appearances, made Amelia's heart race. She turned to face him, finding in his eyes the same vulnerability she felt. That wasn't in the contract, she joked softly, before her lips met his in a deep, true kiss. The Vanity Fair article made exactly the impact Patricia had predicted. The image of Christopher and Amelia on the cover, with their natural intimacy and genuine smiles, captured the public's imagination. But it was the in-depth interview that really changed the narrative about the Bennetts. Requests to partner with the Bennett Foundation have tripled since the publication, James reported during a morning meeting in Christopher's office, especially after Amelia mentioned the scholarship program for immigrant children. Christopher smiled, remembering how Amelia's eyes had lit up during the interview when she talked about her philanthropic initiatives. She has a natural gift for it, he commented, to see beyond the numbers and find the human potential. The pregnancy was now in its 6th month, and Amelia was facing the changes in her body with a mixture of wonder and anxiety. That morning, as she prepared for another day of appointments, she realized that none of her business clothes fit comfortably. "This calls for an emergency intervention," Patricia declared when she found Amelia close to tears in her closet. "I've called Vera Wong. She's going to see us in person this afternoon." Vera Wong's atelier on Madison Avenue was a sanctuary of elegance. The designer herself welcomed Amelia with genuine enthusiasm. Abby followed her story through the media. "Pregnancy doesn't mean sacrificing style," Vera declared, circling Amelia with a critical eye. "Let's create pieces that celebrate this special moment." While Amelia was being measured and photographed, her mind wandered to the conversation she would have with Christopher that evening. The last doctor's appointment had revealed something she hadn't yet shared with anyone. Back at the mansion, she found Christopher in his usual place in the library, but something was different. The room was lit only by candles and soft music was playing in the background. "What's that?" she asked, pausing in the doorway. Christopher stood up, a nervous smile on his face. "We need to talk, but first," he moved closer, taking her hands in his. "I want to do something I should have done a long time ago." To Amelia's surprise, he knelt down in front of her, taking a small velvet box out of his pocket. "I know we're already married, but that was a contract. This," he opened the box to reveal a vintage sapphire ring, "is a proposal." Amelia felt tears forming in her eyes. "Christopher, Amelia Santos Bennett," he continued, his voice laced with emotion, "would you do me the honor of marrying me again? Not by contract, not by necessity, but because I can't imagine my life without you." The tears now flowed freely down Amelia's face. "Yes," she whispered, "1,000 times yes." When Christopher slid the ring onto her finger, next to the original ring, Amelia felt the baby move vigorously. "I think we have one more approval," she laughed, placing his hand on her belly. "Actually, we have 2 approvals." Christopher froze, processing her words. "2 twins," Amelia confirmed, smiling through her tears. "A boy and a girl. William and Sophia will have each other from the start." The news of the twins and the marriage proposal turned what would have been an ordinary evening into an intimate celebration. Christopher canceled all his meetings the next day, something unheard of in his career. "Patricia is going to go mad when she finds out she has 2 christenings to plan," Amelia commented later, snuggled in Christopher's arms on the library sofa. "In a wedding," he added, playing with the sapphire ring on her finger. "This time we'll do it our way. No pressure, no outside expectations." The plan was to hold an intimate ceremony in the garden of the mansion after the birth of the twins. Something meaningful that would celebrate not only their love, but the family they had built in such an unexpected way. "You know what's funny?" Amelia reflected, watching the flames in the fireplace. "When we signed that contract, I thought I was walking into an elaborate farce. But maybe that contract was just the universe nudging us in the right direction." Christopher kissed her temples softly. "You turn a business deal into a love story. You turn a mansion into a home. You turn a CEO focused only on numbers into a man who can't wait to rock his children in that rocking chair." The moment was interrupted by Margaret, bringing Amelia some chamomile tea, part of her new evening routine. The housekeeper smiled at the sight of the new ring. "Finally," she murmured, winking at Christopher before leaving. That night, lying in their bed, Christopher and Amelia planned for the future, no longer limited by contractual clauses or social expectations, but expanded by the love they had discovered along the way. "Two babies," Christopher murmured, his hand resting protectively on Amelia's belly. "I think I'm going to need to learn how to change diapers. And I'm going to have to learn not to worry so much," Amelia replied, entwining her fingers with this. "It looks like we have a lot to learn together." On the morning of the Bennett twins' baby shower, the mansion was buzzing with activity. Patricia had transformed the main hall into a paradise in shades of ivory and gold, with elaborate arrangements of white orchids and delicate crystal butterflies suspended from the ceiling. "It's a bit excessive," Amelia commented, observing the final preparations from her favorite position in the library. At 7 months pregnant, she found comfort in the old leather chair by the window. "Nothing is too much for the first Bennett twins in 3 generations," Patricia replied, consulting her digital clipboard. "Besides, the press will love it." The mention of the press made Amelia sigh. Since the revelation of her twin pregnancy in Vanity Fair, media interest had increased exponentially. Christopher did his best to shield her from the excessive attention, but some events were unavoidable. "Your mother's here," Margaret announced, entering the library. "She's in the nursery, admiring the rocking chair for the 1,000th time." Amelia smiled, remembering how Helena had cried at the sight of the craftsman's work on her late husband's unfinished piece. The chair was now the emotional center of the nursery, a symbol of the union between the Santos and Bennett families. "Amelia," Christopher called from the doorway, impeccable in his navy blue suit. "We have a surprise for you before the guests arrive." He led her into the nursery, where Helena was waiting with tears in her eyes. But she wasn't alone. Next to her was an elegant, gray-haired lady whom Amelia immediately recognized from the photographs. Elizabeth Bennett, her mother-in-law. "Mama," Christopher greeted, clearly nervous. "We didn't expect you until next week." Elizabeth Bennett approached Amelia, her blue eyes, identical to her son's, studying her daughter-in-law with intensity. "I couldn't miss this," she said softly. "Besides, I needed to personally meet the woman who achieved the impossible." "The impossible?" Amelia asked, feeling Christopher tensing beside her. "Making my son prioritize family over business," Elizabeth smiled, gently touching Amelia's belly. "And give me 2 grandchildren at once." The tension in the room dissipated, and soon the 2 grandmothers were comparing notes on trousseaux and family traditions. Helena, with her heavily accented English, gesticulated animatedly as she explained Brazilian protection rituals for newborns. "We should incorporate both cultures," Elizabeth decided. "After all, William and Sophia will be a bridge between 2 worlds." The baby shower itself was a memorable event. Manhattan's high society mingled with the local Brazilian community, creating a unique atmosphere of multicultural celebration. Patricia watched in satisfaction as influencers discreetly documented the harmonious fusion of traditions. "The presents are arriving," Margaret reported, leading a team of staff carrying elaborately wrapped packages. "The East Wing is almost completely taken." Among the conventional gifts, Hermes mobiles, Burberry blankets, and a pair of personalized Cybex strollers. There were also more significant items. The Brazilian community had come together to create a book of traditional recipes, each accompanied by a family story. Elizabeth Bennett brought a pair of Baccarat crystal shoes that had belonged to the first generation of the family. "But this one," Helena said, handing over a small carved wooden box, "is special." Inside the box was an antique silver rosary with dark wood beads that exuded a soft sandalwood scent. "It was your father's," Helena explained in Portuguese. "He always said he would protect his grandchildren." Amelia felt the tears coming, a common occurrence in recent months that she blamed on pregnancy hormones. Christopher, who had been secretly studying Portuguese, understood enough to wrap his wife's shoulders in a protective embrace. "Let's hang it between the cribs," he suggested softly. The intimate moment was interrupted by a commotion at the entrance to the hall. Linway had arrived, carrying 2 small packages. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, her elegant posture masking any discomfort. But in Chinese culture, twins are considered a special blessing. The silence that followed was broken by Amelia, who stood up with some difficulty and approached Lin Wei. "You're welcome," she said sincerely. "Every blessing is appreciated." The packages contained 2 small jade bracelets, each with a different Chinese character. "Protection and prosperity," Lin Wei explained. "Values that transcend cultures." Elizabeth Bennet watched the scene with a knowing smile. Later, as the guests began to leave, she found a moment alone with Christopher. "You chose well," she said simply, even if he didn't realize it at first. Christopher watched Amelia from across the room, laughing at something Helena had said while stroking her protruding belly. "Actually," he replied, "I think she chose me. It just took me a while to realize how lucky I was." The arrival of fall in Manhattan brought not only the changing of the leaves, but also a different rhythm to the Bennet mansion. As the 8th month of her pregnancy approached, Amelia adapted her routine to the increasingly demanding needs of the twins. The nursery, now complete with baby shower gifts, became her favorite refuge on quiet afternoons. "The quarterly reports can wait," Christopher insisted, finding her organizing the drawers with tiny clothes for the 3rd time. "You should be resting. It's impossible to rest with 2 future executives using my ribs as a springboard," she joked, but allowed him to guide her to the rocking chair. Living with Elizabeth Bennet had proved surprisingly pleasant. The matriarch of the family had decided to extend her stay in New York, occupying the guest suite downstairs. Her presence brought a new dynamic to the mansion, especially on the mornings when she and Helena met to plan the grandchildren's future. "Mom was never so present," Christopher commented during an intimate dinner in her suite. "Not even when I was a child. People change," Amelia replied softly, observing how he unconsciously stroked her belly as he spoke. "Sometimes we need second chances to make things right." The conversation was interrupted by James Hartford, who arrived unannounced with urgent documents. "The council was pressing for a decision on paternity leave," he explained, spreading papers on the dining table. "I've already made my decision," Christopher replied firmly. 3 months, no negotiation. The company will survive without me for a quarter." The determination in his voice made Amelia smile. It was further evidence of how he had changed, how his priorities had been fundamentally realigned. The next morning, during the family breakfast that had become a tradition, Elizabeth surprised everyone with an announcement. "I have decided to transfer the chairmanship of the Bennet Foundation board to Amelia," she declared, as if commenting on the weather. Effective immediately, the silence that followed was broken by the sound of Christopher's cup hitting the saucer. "Mom, that's the most sensible decision," Elizabeth added. "Amelia has already proven her worth, not only as a manager, but as someone who truly understands the purpose of the foundation." Helena, who was still struggling with some English expressions, shook her daughter's hand with pride. "My girl," she murmured in Portuguese, "your father would be so proud." News of Amelia's appointment quickly spread through Manhattan's social and corporate circles. Patricia organized a discreet press conference where Amelia, radiant in a navy blue Vera Wang dress, presented her vision for the future of the foundation. "We want to create bridges," she explained to journalists, her natural confidence impressing even the most skeptical. "Between communities, between cultures, between those who can help and those who need help." Christopher, watching from the back of the room, felt his heart swell with pride. The shy woman he had known as a housekeeper now commanded the attention of a room full of journalists with natural grace and authority. Later that day, while reviewing plans for the new pediatric wing of Presbyterian Hospital that the foundation was funding, Amelia felt a stronger contraction than usual. "It's nothing," she assured him, seeing the instant concern on Christopher's face. Dr. Reynolds said it's normal at this stage. But Christopher was already on the phone to his driver, and within minutes they were on their way to the hospital. The excitement at the mansion was immediate. Helena praying in Portuguese, Elizabeth organizing a security team, and Margaret preparing the maternity bag that had been ready for weeks. At the hospital, after a series of tests, Dr. Reynolds confirmed that it was just a false alarm, but would want to keep you under observation for a few hours, just in case, she added, noticing Christopher's anxious look. "Sorry to have caused such a fuss," Amelia muttered when they were finally alone in the room. Christopher sat on the edge of the bed, interlacing his fingers with hers. "Don't apologize," Besides, he smiled, it was a good rehearsal for the big day. The big day was getting closer, and with it came the final preparations. The main room of the mansion was adapted with a specific area for the twins' first days, following the Brazilian tradition of keeping newborns close to their parents. That's how we create strong bonds, Helena explained to Elizabeth, who initially found the idea strange but soon surrendered to the ancient wisdom. The fusion of cultures and traditions that was taking place at the Bennet mansion was a perfect reflection of the larger transformation that had taken place in their lives. What had begun as a business arrangement had become a rich tapestry of love, family, and purpose. The night the Bennet twins decided to come into the world, Manhattan was covered in a thin layer of premature snow. It was a quiet Saturday, and Amelia was organizing the last details of the Bennett Foundation's scholarship program when she felt the first real contraction. "Christopher," she called calmly, although her heart was racing. He was in the adjacent office, reviewing documents. "I think it's time." The calm in Amelia's voice contrasted with the controlled chaos that followed. Christopher, who had mentally rehearsed this moment hundreds of times, activated the meticulously devised plan. Within minutes, the armored Mercedes was ready. Margaret coordinated the team with military precision, and both Helena and Elizabeth were already on their way to the hospital. "Breathe with me," Christopher murmured, holding Amelia's hand as they drove through the city. She smiled, noticing how he was following to the letter the instructions from the childbirth classes they had attended together. At Presbyterian Hospital, the luxurious birthing suite, prepared weeks before, awaited. Dr. Reynolds was already standing by, her calm presence soothing everyone's nerves. "The twins are in perfect position," she announced after the initial examinations. "But we need to be patient. First births often take a long time." The hours that followed were a delicate dance between pain and anticipation. Christopher didn't leave Amelia's side for a second, massaging her back, offering ice, reciting words of encouragement in his newly learned Portuguese. "You look incredible," he whispered during a particularly strong contraction. "So strong, so brave." In the hallway, Helena prayed her rosary, the same one that now decorated the twins' nursery, while Elizabeth discreetly coordinated with Patricia the official statement that would be released after the birth. "William is coming first," Dr. Reynolds announced when it was time for the pulse. "Amelia, are you ready?" William Bennett's first cry echoed through the room at 3:47 in the morning, strong and vigorous as his personality had already shown. His eyes, when briefly opened, revealed the same deep blue as his father. "He's perfect," Christopher whispered, tears streaming freely down his face as he held his son for the first time. Sophia, not wanting to be too far behind her brother, arrived exactly 12 minutes later, her crying softer, but just as determined. Her delicate features resembled Amelia's, and a small crescent-shaped birthmark on her left wrist made her unique. "Two miracles," Amelia murmured, exhausted but radiant, when she finally held both babies in her arms. "Our little miracles?" Christopher watched the scene with an emotion he had never experienced before. The woman who had come into his life through a contract now held his children, his heirs, yes, but much more than that. The living proof of the true love they had built. The grandmothers were allowed into the suite an hour later, after the first medical care. Helena wept copiously at the sight of her grandchildren, murmuring blessings in Portuguese. Elizabeth, normally so restrained, let her mask of sophistication fall as she held Sophia. "She has the eyes of the Bennets," she declared proudly, "but the strength of the saints." The news of the birth of the Bennet twins dominated the morning's headlines. Patricia had orchestrated an elegant and discreet announcement, respecting the couple's desire for privacy while satisfying public curiosity. In the days that followed, the hospital suite was transformed into a sanctuary of first moments. Christopher learned to change diapers with a dedication that surprised everyone, while Amelia discovered the challenges and joys of simultaneous breastfeeding. "You make it look easy," he commented one evening, watching her feed the twins naturally. "None of it is easy," she replied with a tired smile. "But it's perfectly imperfect, just the way it should be." A week after the birth, the Bennet family finally returned to the mansion. The master bedroom, adapted to receive the newborns, became the heart of the house. The rocking chair, an heirloom from Amelia's father, proved its worth during the long nights of crying and consoling. "Your father would be so proud," Helena said one afternoon, finding Amelia cradling William in the chair while Christopher walked Sophia around the room. "He always knew you were destined for great things." "Great things start with small moments," Amelia replied, watching her son fall asleep. "And sometimes, the greatest miracles come disguised as business deals." Christopher smiled at the comment, approaching with Sophia. "Who knew that contract would bring us here?" "I always knew," Margaret commented from the doorway, bringing in more clean diapers. "From day one, when I saw how you two looked at each other without realizing you were looking." 3 months after the birth of the twins, the Bennett mansion had found its new rhythm. The days flowed in a synchronized dance of bottle feeds, diaper changes, and precious moments captured by the cameras of delighted smartphones. Christopher, faithful to his promise of paternity leave, discovered new facets of fatherhood every day. William has a smile, Amelia commented one morning, watching her son play with his father's fingers during a diaper change. "And the same stubbornness." "And Sophia has her determination," Christopher replied, admiring how the little one was already showing signs of a strong personality, especially during feedings. "She knows exactly what she wants." The transformation of the mansion was evident. What had once been a formal and austere environment now pulsed with life and laughter. The once immaculate rooms now housed carefully selected toys, and even Christopher's office gained a small crib for the afternoons when he needed to work with the babies close by. Elizabeth Bennett, who had extended her stay indefinitely, surprised everyone with her adaptation to the role of grandmother. It was common to find her in the nursery, singing old French lullabies, a tradition from her own childhood that she was now passing on. "I never thought I'd see her like this," Christopher confessed to Amelia one evening as they watched his mother cradle Sophia. "So present. Sometimes we need second chances to find out who we really are," Amelia replied, remembering her own journey of transformation. The Bennett Foundation was flourishing under Amelia's leadership. Even though her attention was divided between the babies and her work, she had implemented a revolutionary support program for immigrant families, inspired by her own story, which was already being replicated by other organizations. "You've built something extraordinary," Patricia commented during a board meeting, where Amelia was presenting the results of the first trimester with the twins sleeping peacefully in their baby carriages next to her. The religious wedding planned for when the twins turned 6 months old was beginning to take shape. Unlike the rushed civil ceremony they had held at the beginning, this would be a celebration of true love that had blossomed out of the most unlikely circumstances. "This time," Christopher said as they went over the plans with the organizer, "we'll do everything our own way." The ceremony would be held in the mansion's garden, with Amelia's father's rocking chair taking pride of place. Helena had insisted on incorporating elements of Brazilian culture, including the rings being carried on a Bible, a tradition in her region. One afternoon, while the twins were taking their afternoon nap, Christopher found Amelia in the library, rereading the original contract that had started it all. "It seems like a lifetime ago," he commented, taking a seat next to her. "It's amazing how such a cold document could have led to something so profoundly real," she replied, her fingers tracing the clauses that now seemed almost absurd. "Do you know what's more incredible?" Christopher asked, pulling her close. "How I didn't immediately realize what a treasure I had right in front of me all those years." The moment was interrupted by William crying through the baby monitor, followed quickly by Sophia, a pattern they had already learned to recognize. "Duty calls," Amelia smiled, standing up. "Always together," Christopher replied, a phrase that had become their unofficial mantra. In the nursery, as they soothed the twins, the late afternoon light created a perfect picture of the family they had become. William, his blue eyes identical to his father's, held Christopher's finger tightly, while Sophia, nestled in Amelia's lap, played with her mother's necklace. "If someone had told me a year ago that a marriage contract would bring me so much happiness," Amelia reflected, "I would have thought it impossible." "Nothing is impossible when the heart is in it," Christopher replied, leaning in to kiss her softly. The love they had built was like Amelia's father's rocking chair. Something started with a purpose, transformed by time and care into something much more meaningful and lasting. Every moment shared, every challenge overcome, every smile from the twins had added a new layer of depth to their relationship. "I think we were always meant to be," Amelia whispered, watching the babies finally fall asleep. "We just needed a nudge from fate." "In the form of a contract," Christopher added with a smile. As night fell over Manhattan, the Bennett mansion settled into a peace that transcended simple silence. It was the peace of a family built on foundations of true love, strengthened by courageous choices and sustained by the certainty that the best contracts are those written not on paper, but in the heart. And so, what had begun as an agreement of convenience had turned into the most authentic of love stories, proving that sometimes the most unexpected paths are those that lead us exactly where we should be.